I still have voidform at 36. Please, 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 please.
I got to maintain, cause the ghetto right.
I might actually kind of do it right. Please soak that twirl.
In the membrane.
I don't give a
Insane in the brain.
Oh my.
Insane.
Dude, I entered voidform incorrectly. Alright, dispersing the mistake. I can save it. I can save this.
Somebody go get that one.
Save my voidform! No, I dropped it. No, it's all over. I delete myself. So thank you for joining me for my proof of concept video. Really, it's only meant for one person. Someone that I believe will understand everything I'm about to say, both in my 9-page document as well as this video. I truly believe that this is the way to help players and developers get what they want out of the game again. I really believe this with every fiber in my body. Shadow Priest was very special, and it helped me see things in a different light than some other player, or even another developer, or even yourself. And it's this perspective that was unique. And I'm not claiming to be smarter than anyone else or have all the answers. I feel like the answers were just given to me, and that's what this video is about. I want to show you the answers that were handed to me on a silver platter. Covenant's philosophy I truly believe in, but what Shadow showed me is what Covenant should have been the entire time, and it was subspecs. So let me show you what subspecs might look like. It is fun to go through, and I hope you are willing to embrace them one day. Alright, so let's walk through a Shadow Priest what-if scenario. If Subspecs was added to the game, what would that look like for Devouring Plague version of Shadow and a Void Priest version of Shadow? And I want to start in the Netherlight Temple, the Order Hall for Priest, because if we introduce, or if you consider introducing the split decision in the leveling process, it really allows the player early on to make this decision and also invest into the leveling process even further. So imagine at level 45 you get prompted in order to continue on your talent tree at the 45 row, you have to visit a priest trainer. And priest trainer in any major city would essentially offer the same thing. So we'll walk to a priest trainer, and I'm going to use the Netherlight Temple. And I like Alonzo's Fowl, so we're going to talk to him and pretend that he's going to be the guy for the Legion. If you're leveling in Legion, he'll be the guy, potentially. So he'll offer us, hey, you know, I'm going to train you on Devouring Plague. And what Devouring Plague is going to do for us is unlock the level 45 row and all the stuff associated with the level 45 row. If you're leveling in Legion and you have the artifact, you also could get prompted, maybe this is even a Xalatath Whisper, to talk to Natalie instead. So then we walk over to the other wing of the Order Hall and we talk to Natalie. And Natalie says, instead of going down the road of the Devouring Plague road, you can alternatively go down a different path, the Void path. And between Alonzus and Natalie, and again, I'm not a lore expert, so it doesn't have to be this way, but basically give you the choice. You talk to Alonzus, he'll give you Devouring Plague, and if you talk with Natalie, she'll give you Void Priest. So this is where the split can happen right at 45. So let's get into how the talents would work, or could potentially work, and how the spell book also works. Because we're only influencing the spec, splitting this tree at level 45, essentially 75% of the spec is identical. So let's look at how this works with the talents in a little bit more detail. At level 45, you get prompted to visit a priest trainer, because your talent tree just won't unlock unless you speak to one. And when you speak to one, doesn't matter what city you're in, you get access to Devouring Plague, and also the level 45 and level 50 talent row. So this should be indicated clearly in the UI that those 2 rows are specific to Devouring Plague. So alternatively, if you were in Legion Order Hall, you would get prompted about Natalie like I just showed you. So Natalie will give you, instead, the Void Priest. And this would be an alternative path, also indicated by a slightly different color, just to be clear to the player that it is a choice and it's different from the other one. So this alternative path is optional only through the Order Hall. And I say that because a player can always go back to the Order Hall and take the path. It doesn't take much to unlock the Order Hall and the artifact itself. And it's a little bit RP and a nice story and a little bit of the quest chain if they didn't already do it. Also, in the other major cities, when you train Devouring Plague, if it's not in Legion, Alonza's Foul, and say it's in Stormwind or Pandaria, the priest trainer could hint that there is an alternative path into the Void, kind of hinting to the player that this is a choice and somewhere in the world of Warcraft you have an option. And of course they're just going to wowhead the answer and do it anyway. So let's split the tree and cut, copy, and paste existing Blizzard assets to allow the magic to come to life. So let's eliminate duplicates on the specs that don't fit the theme or the subspec. This includes Hungering Void for both specs because it doesn't work for either one. So the next step is actually quite exciting. We can see just how much Devouring Plague Priest was still being dominated by void form relics of the past. So there's just as much resurrection to Devouring Plague Priest identity as there is Void Priest identity. But let's start with Devouring Plague Priest, because even though I'm not a fan of it, I'm actually really excited to show what it would look like, or easily what it would resurrect into. So, starting with the bottom row, the final 2 talents, returning an old one, Clarity of Power, and Dark Archangel. Now, Archangel is a PvP talent today for Discipline. However, I'd like to see it come back for Shadow, as I hear a lot of priests asking for the old glyph wings back. The wings, I mean, I'm with the old priests. I remember them. They were really cool. And I understand why they don't exist today. They directly conflict with the new lore of Shadow when they're combined. So if we pull them apart, it allows for the space, the creative space, to return and excite players that are more interested in that route, that they can get the wings back. Because they were cool. Speaking of cool, I remember Halo and Cascade. Both are really, really cool spells. And they're also like AoE in nature. So when they were removed from the toolkit in Legion, no wonder people are just like, I want it back, I want it back. And listen, I know MoP homogenized everything under the sun. However, I'm going to pencil in something as an idea. This whole presentation is just ideas. But why not just return the second to last row almost as it was? So I'm going to leave one spot open, and let's detour to Void Priest. Starting with the same thing, row 50. Surrender to Madness should go back to either a Legion version, not Emerald Nightmare, but the rest of Legion, or a BFA version. I'm okay with either, but not the Shadowlands, not Shadowlands version. So Surrender is Surrender. Some kind of real one. And I see no reason why Dark Ascension shouldn't also come back as is. But I do want to touch on briefly Ancient Madness. Ancient Madness is essentially a poor man's COI, and you could bring it just like it is over into this design with no problems. However, if Legion Shadow Priest essentially makes a comeback, and I don't mean the Emerald Nightmare version, I mean the rest of Legion version, then you might want to consider having a stack modifier instead of Ancient Madness. If you decide to do a stack modifier, such as Mass Hysteria or Real COI, I highly recommend making those a baseline passive ability, and if you do that, it's going to leave a talent open. And again, if you bring back Mass Hysteria or a Real COI, they need to be very, very tame so they don't spiral out of control again. But if you decide to go that route, then that leaves this talent will end up empty, depending on what Blizzard's decision might be here. And I at the very least wanted to offer some 2 cents if you decide that stack modifiers can come back in a passive sense baseline, then you could consider Reaper of Souls for this talent spot instead of Ancient Madness. It should have some very interesting and fun synergy to Death and Madness. Personally, I'd like to see some sort of stack modifier baseline in the Reaper of Souls talent. Just gonna throw that out there. Alright, so the last talent for Void Priest really should be Death and Madness. And because thematically, it just fits. Also, talent row 45 should at least give Void Priest something to counter the ridiculous amount of AoE that Devouring Plague Priest is gonna have. It already has, and it's gonna get Halo. It should get Halo and Cascade back. So Death and Madness really can't reside with Devouring Plague Priest anymore. Naturally, Death and Madness needs to move, and it fits really nicely. So let's finish up Devouring Plague final talent rows before we get into the core tree. The tree trunk, if you will. Searing Nightmare was added in Shadowlands, and it's a very heavy spender. It's very anti-void form in nature. Because of this, it should be the final talent. The talent would need an update to change it to spend orbs rather than insanity, or if you didn't want to rework the talent in that way, you could just replace it with the original talent of Orb Priest, which is Void Entropy. Probably should be renamed so it sticks a little bit better with thematics by pulling the Void out of Devouring Plague Priest. So we're left with a few holes in the talent tree that we have to kind of go back and really think about, and it's not really a hard thought, don't get me wrong here. But essentially, until you hit level 45, you don't have a spender. And essentially what we're looking at is more like a classic Shadow Priest, one that just spends mana. There is no resource, there is no insanity. And there's also no Devouring Plague orb spender. And I'll get back to orbs later, but let's go through the tree now top to bottom and take a look at what we have left. So one side effect of the Shadowlands rework, so much stuff was being shoved in the talent tree to make things work that the first row, level 15 row, is really overpowered. And, you know, that's another reason why Death and Madness, glad to see it move out of that row. It really needed to move. So along with that, so does Unfurling Darkness. So we're going to move that down into an appropriate row of power. And the nature of Unfurling Darkness, it's good for different scenarios with your dots in a multi-target situation. So it should synergize well in the row with Misery or a decision to go Twist of Fate. Now we can revisit row 15 as getting it more traditional, where it's nowhere near as ridiculously strong as what we saw in Shadowlands. So looking to the past, and a lot of this is, I'm not creating anything new here, we're just looking to the past to see what makes sense logically. In the past, row 15 had a talent called Angelic Bulwark and Desperate Prayer. And I really think Desperate Prayer should get out of baseline, because we already have Dispersion baseline, and keybinds are a complaint in Shadowlands. So let's move Desperate Prayer into a talent, and no one's going to complain about that pruning off the baseline. And bring back Angelic Bulwark, which gives us another survival type of thing. So really, the first row is really about survival. which makes sense. If you're row 15 and you're a new player, you want to survive, because you probably suck at DPS. Let's be frank. So I think row 15, the first row, should go back to that. And because of that, Fortress of the Mind really should go, leaving another hole in the first row. But this allows us to solve another problem that we have. Sand Lane is another survival skill that competing with movement, which doesn't make any sense. So let's move Sand Lane where it belongs. So row 1 is all about survival. It's just, what type of survival do you want? More for your group? More for yourself? More oh shit button? Now it all of a sudden makes sense, and this is more in line with how it was in the past. Because we moved Sand Lane, the movement row opens up a spot. Logically, Spectral Guise should come back. It's highly, highly requested to come back, and I would love to see it come back. It's good for PvP, and it lets you take body and soul more often in raids. It just makes sense. So at level 45, when the path is chosen, a passive is learned within Shadow to reduce the offensive mana cost by 100%. This would show the progression of exactly how the base priest dives deeper into the shadows versus their healing counterparts. So this is mind-blowing because it explains the progression, and it has a massive RP value, as well as pulling on the nostalgia of classic players in the earlier part of the leveling process. A Subspec spellbook can offer things specific for each path. Void Priest would get Void Eruption, Void Form, Legacy of the Void. Devouring Plague Priest would get Shadow Orb Generation. Later on at level 50, Devouring Plague Priest can get Dark Thoughts, and Void Priest can gain Whispers of the Damned, both very important to the functionality of each design. So I highly recommend two important things to make Void Priest more universally accepted. The passive spell, Hallucinations, change it to allow Power Word Shield to be cast on debuffed players. But if you cast on a debuffed player, there's no mana cost and there's no shield effect. But you can still generate insanity in between trash packs and boss disconnects. The second and last most important thing about Void Priest, and to make sure that it's fully restored properly and it doesn't have a hate train from even the people that are supposed to like it, is the 1% haste per second per stack is absolutely critical to the gameplay. Subspec designs allow a full return of the design to more of a Legion-like state. Lastly, Shadow Form. This is really cool, and I saved this for last. Everyone's been crying for old Shadow Form back, and this gives you the opportunity to unprune it. You can give old Shadow Form to Devouring Plague Priest, and then Void Priest could also get the Legion version of Shadow Form back. But at the very least, I would unprune the original Shadow Form for Devouring Plague. And players will love you for it. So, what I presented today is not my design. You could say, okay, it was my idea, but I don't even take credit for my idea either. All this is unpruning of Blizzard hits. It's a continuation, a natural continuation from Shadowlands, which was unpruning abilities. And Covenants tried to give us, diversity, strengths and weaknesses, and meaningful choice. But as I wrote in my paper, Borrowed Power is just going to always struggle with that. And I think Subspecs is a more natural solution. And I hope that I've convinced you in my paper why I think it's doable. Not only doable, but probably a hell of a lot easier and less cost. So give people back what they crave, right? This isn't unique to me and Void Form Shadow Priest. Let people have what excites them. Unprune what we lost, not just what I lost, what everybody lost. And the only way to do that is Subspecs. And I think Subspecs can put it back into the game where it's not going to break it or bloat it. So hopefully I've convinced you by now. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. If you made it this far, I'm in your debt if you really did listen to me. I do have one more favor though. If you could throw me a like or a dislike on this video, I would appreciate the feedback. I did put a lot of work into this, and that's all I ask, is to give me your feedback in the form of the anonymous like, dislike button. And outside of that, you know, I really hope at the very least you had a takeaway from it. I'm sure out of the mountain of information, even if you don't believe me 100%, maybe you got at least something out of it and I didn't waste your time. And I wish you the best. Thanks again.
Imagine her fury when I abandoned her at the worst time. I can be very easy to lose. Remember that. Another seed of corruption planted in death. An unquiet spirit will wander in anger and grow in pain. Almost completely gone, as if it never existed.